couple days ago, I was watching the second episode of Promise Neverland. And it was funny because I watched it initially on a full stomach. And then by the end of it, I had an empty stomach and felt hungry. Especially that part when the three main kids all said that they were the most intelligent ones. And they will also be the most desired ones because they will have the most developed brains. And therefore, they will probably be the most tasty of them all. It made me think of Wile E. Coyote chasing Roadrunner. Oh, that fell flat, didn't it? Okay.
The opinions expressed in the following are those of its participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the producers and the Six Talk Podcast Network. Also, the following contains mature material and mild language, which may not be suitable for all audiences. Discretion is advised.
For Saturday night, May the 1st, 2021, this is episode 41 of the Anime Roundtable Canada. Good evening once again from 6 Points, 10 minutes south of the Anime North Compound in the west end of Toronto. Mike Nicolas here, joined as always by James Austin, Kevin Ng, Mohamed Sharmarke, and Geoff Greig, as the roundtable now assembles. As always, we want you to be part of the conversation as well. AnimeRoundtable@gmail.com is our email address. Twitter and Instagram @AnimeRoundtable. AnimeRoundtable.com is our website for full show notes and past episodes. And of course, YouTube, Discord, Twitch. We should mention them, but you know where we are with those. So let's start this week, though, by looking back after we talked a little bit with JP from Anime Lockdown a couple weeks ago in episode 40. Mo and Geoff, I know, have heard the episode already, and I want to get their takeaways from the conversation. So, Mo, Geoff, you guys have a thought coming from all that? Either of you?
I think this would be a good time for crickets, right?
Well, I definitely have two main takeaways. The first one was I thought it was really great to hear the discussion about the differences between the fan run conventions and the more corporate ones, and it got me thinking about the status of what these conventions are going to be like after the pandemic or after things stabilize, if that this pandemic's going to be with us for years, and the sense of loss that at least JP mentioned about that sort of fan run atmosphere, compared to the corporate ones. And I got to thinking, which ones, which type of convention are the most vulnerable? And I don't know if I have the answer right now. I'm not sure if even either of the types of conventions have the answers themselves. But it did give me some amount of hope that the fan run model, I think, will survive, because I think that there will be that desire for social experiences and community. So even though that I think that maybe there'll be a lot more of those that maybe die off or aren't able to continue, I do think that either they'll bounce back or other versions of them will eventually bounce back.
I'm inclined to agree, actually. After the episode, I started to think a little bit more about his criticism of the Project Anime article. And the more I thought about it, the more I really came to the thinking that that really just addresses commercial conventions.
Yeah.
So it was a blueprint to me, it at least not really a blueprint, but it started to address the concerns that the big ones, the anime expos, the anime Japans, or whatever it's called there, the industry conventions. To a lesser degree, maybe Comic Con as well.
And even something like Fan Expo too, I think would fall under that.
The other one is the
I think they have
Crunchyroll
to have,
Expo as well.
yeah. Well, maybe Crunchyroll Expo probably most notably. I mean,
And
there's
if
one right
that
there.
goes through for that merger, then that'll be a big thorn for other conventions, right? Sure, they'll reach out, but how much are they going to reach out if they can do just their own thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's sort of like Apple, the way they
I mean,
do things
I was
sometimes.
gonna say that this feels a lot like what DC's doing with Comic Con this year with the DC fandom. I feel like industry run conventions or industry presence at conventions will be lessened as the time goes on, especially if they can do it all online and generate just as much revenue as they would otherwise. I mean, I feel like that would be the route for them to go, right?
Yeah, or not so much as much revenue to me. It's more they wouldn't have as many
And
costs.
depending on the industry too, it's controlling the message and stuff like that. We've seen that in the video game industry with people just bailing on the ESA and E3 even for this year and stuff like that, and still doing kind of their own thing online. So it'll be interesting what happens with in-person events going forward in the future.
I mean, if I'm a major
Mm-hmm.
corporation, I mean, I'm just waiting for when they start really taking hold of NFTs and so forth, right? I mean, make that part of the admission, being like, come to our convention, you might receive an exclusive NFT or some exclusive online
I
thing.
thought Sega was talking about doing something with NFTs or something like that earlier in the
Yeah,
week or so. It was
that
kind of nuts.
that's disheartening, especially since like a week before the Sonic Twitter, the Sonic the Hedgehog Twitter had like a pro environmental tweet. It was kind of
I mean, come on. I mean,
no,
I,
I'm not going to come on. NFTs are incredibly damaging to the environment. I think they are garbage and incredibly problematic. And it's hard because we can't stop them at this point. The
nope,
snowball is rolling,
it's
and
over.
it's incredibly depressing.
you know,
I see him in terms of the whole carbon footprint and mining thing. That's the thing. I agree with it, but the sad part is
Oh yeah,
cash
100%. I was
money.
just gonna say like NFTs,
And
like on a transactional basis. I think it's like for every one, not NFT but Bitcoin's crypto in general. Like anytime you buy something with crypto, you're using more energy than a million Visa transactions. Like apparently, NFTs consume the amount of power that the state of New York generates in total, the whole state.
what?
And it's I understand that the apparently NFTs and cryptocurrency as it is by itself will raise the planet's temperature by 2 degrees on its own. So yeah, we're fucked. It's over, guys. Nothing we can do about it. Just cash in now. Get your hands as much crypto as you can. It's just the way of the future, buddy.
But I think what's
We're going to the moon again.
That's okay.
Oh,
I
sorry, Jeff.
think what's
Sorry, Jeff.
interesting about that is that, I don't think we've seen any evidence of, the sort of corporate conventions, as I call them, going into the NFT realm. But if they do, which is, I think, a possibility, I think it would weirdly politicize the two types of conventions sort of even more. Like we'd basically have like capitalist convention versus more socialist conventions. Your I don't want to lump Anime North in there, but your Con Bravo or your FrostCon, the more independent fan run grassroots type of thing. Um,
No, I
Let's
mean,
reel it back a
yeah,
little bit. Let's reel.
I was gonna say,
Let's reel back.
once that Rubicon is crossed by uh, most likely corporate conventions, once they cross that Rubicon of getting into the NFTs or the exclusives, I mean, yeah, you're right. It's just gonna be fan run versus corporate. I mean, that's and you'll pick
The true a true
it's
version of it, right? A true
and
it's
I
version
like
of it.
don't.
Conversation in my mind still for NFTs is who exactly is going after them and buying them, because I'm still scratching my head over them and stuff like that, because in my mind it's still a recent phenomenon. I think it's similar for Mike too. They're not for people like us,
I'm still
that's for
trying to wrap
sure.
my head around it. I mean, yes, because I was into the whole baseball card thing
and
back then.
you remember how dicey, not dicey, but well, actually dicey, how dicey that was in like the 80s and 90s. I mean, there's a big racket for that back then, and then people like the Beanie Baby effect. It's like it comes in waves.
It's
I was
hilarious.
thinking Pogs.
My mother told me. My mother told me that my youngest sister went back to their home, like to my parents' place, a couple weeks ago, and took her Beanie Baby collection, which was sitting in a huge plastic bag in what used to be her bedroom. And my understanding is the sorting still continues. Okay,
So out of interest, Mike, does she
well,
have the Beanie Baby from the Blue Jays game? Because I know the Jays did one, and we have, I think, a couple of them. They're probably worth nothing though.
I have. Ooh, I had
Oh, so
two
you
of
have
them,
two too. Oh
and
man,
I
they
gave
were
one
nice.
of them away. I gave one of them away. I still have the other. Its name was Rocket. That was a late '90s Beanie
And
Baby.
I
It was a
feel
Blue
like they
Jay,
gave us an
and it
extra one because
was.
there wasn't that many people at that game. I forget which game it was.
Oh, you mean a
Yeah, it
giveaway
was a
at
giveaway
the
at the
Dome?
Dome. That
Oh,
was a
I didn't know
giveaway at
about
the
that one.
Dome
So it might
of
have been a
the
mini version.
Beanie Babies and stuff like that. It was blue in that.
It might have been a. I'm thinking that might have been a mini version, but just a little context. In the late '90s, Roger Clemens briefly played for the Toronto Blue Jays, and around the same time, a Blue Jay Beanie Baby came out, and they named it Rocket.
It might have been when he was
Good
pitching
cross
too
promo
that
right there.
day.
Oh no, oh probably wouldn't be shocked. Anyway, just reel back for a second. So once again, just going back to the whole online thing, just to end off that thought. So I could foresee some online components still there in a corporate sense. What about the fan sense? And just for reference, once again, today's May 1st. A couple weeks ago, we did mention today is the last day for signups for the Anime North Stay at Home edition for the panels. I think that closed up just a few minutes ago. It's just after 9 p.m. here in Toronto. So, what about something like that?
I,
Or do we leave that more in the realm of, say, the online lectures, which we've talked about on this
Yeah,
show
like I could see
in the
it
past?
becoming sort of an infrequent thing. Like if there was a lecture that, happened in November or February or something that, Anime North was interested in, they thought that, their community or the participants, the guests would be interested in. I could see them partnering with that the same way they, kind of do their Halloween couple days or day event, but I don't know if multi-day conventions online will become a thing after we're used
Yeah.
to the new normal, or barring another pandemic.
I guess it depends. I guess a lot of it will depend on what new normal, just as you said, will look like. And so I sort of agree with JP in the sense I think we all like those social aspects to a degree. Like, well, individuals will have their preferences to varying degrees.
Yeah, I mean, I
Mo,
would say I beg to differ. I feel like after almost 2 years of lockdowns, conventions will be back in like a major swing. I mean, I can see 2023's Anime North being the biggest it's ever been. I mean,
Absolutely.
right?
oh, the rock,
Oh
a
yeah.
rock rebound effect. Okay, yeah. Well, yeah. I don't think I don't call that necessarily a disagreement. It's just I'm wondering what this new normal, quote unquote, will look like because that's been a phrase that's been bandied about since the pandemic began, or since were thinking that we were near the end of
I
this
could see
pandemic.
I could see
So
online
what?
conventions like as a separate entity, maybe persisting, but not to the level that they are now. Because I think that the participation has been almost as a necessity, or as a desperation or an interest in the participants, the guests, to kind of have some semblance of what was lost. But I think that there are, for people who might be homebound, for people with social
Yep.
anxiety,
Yep.
I think that
Mm.
there is going to be a market for online
Mhm.
conventions. I just don't think the participation rates are going to be what they have been throughout the, pandemic proper.
That's a fair statement. I would agree actually.
I think thinking on it too as well, especially maybe for us here in Canada for some of the conventions to get certain guests across the border. They're going to have to do it virtually, so maybe they will stream it on their platforms as well. That could be a solution as well. There, they might do in the first year or something like that, depending on how the borders work out.
Yeah, it's just I could see online just being some sort of accompaniment myself when it comes to the fan side of it. I could see at best an accompaniment, but who knows? I mean, I just thought I'd put that out there. So, our summary, and we can agree or disagree. You can tell me if I'm right or wrong. The online component could be an almost replacement on the corporate side. At least we can have that conversation. Certainly not on the fan side.
I would say so.
But it has a place in some form.
That sounds about right.
And I will now pose the yes-no question I posed with JP and Kevin and James to you two. So in light of Watsuki's issues, quote unquote, what is the possibility of seeing the last two live-action Kenshin movies get an official release in North America? Like, yes or no, will it happen?
Are we talking theater release?
Like, just an official release of any sort.
There will be an official North American release, but not theater release.
Yeah, of any sort.
Okay.
Like, that was actually my second takeaway from the episode. It was
us trashing not us, more JP.
trashing. It's always
Watsuki.
Nice to see that guy taken down a peg. And it was
and deservedly.
And it
honestly,
was great to have JP come out swinging with that statement. That made my heart sing a little bit. I'm so. I mean, this is more of a Japanese law thing, but oh no, a $2,000 fine for child porn. Oh, what a horrid punishment this poor man has. Oh, it's ridiculous. But as
as we've established, content creators of that ilk may not always be rolling in it.
That's fair. But as far as the possibility of the movies coming out, I think that there is a strong possibility, because as much as I'm sure he still gets, some semblance of the profits, I think that the movies are enough separated from him as a creator that they would take the risk for a official release. I just don't think it will be heavily marketed. I think that they'll probably try to release them, since the others have been released. But as Mo said, I don't think a theatrical release is likely. But digital of some kind, I could see it happening.
Okay. There. And that's that. And now we can close the books on episode 40, the landmark episode 40 of the version 2 era. Okay, I know that the big talk this week was Yasuke coming out on Netflix in terms of the streaming side. Kevin, Mo, I know they've watched it. I'll give it a watch, I know, within the coming week. Give me an impression, guys. Give me an impression.
I mean, the first 3 episodes I felt were like a really good, solid 3 episodes. Like, it could have just ended after that, but then they expanded a little bit more. I think by like episode 5, 6-ish, like near the end, the final like bit of it, it gave me like X 1995 or 1999 vibes, the Dragons of Heaven, Dragons of Earth type feel. But in a good way. It was just the show was just so much in so many different directions. I liked it. I really enjoyed it.
Kevin,
it just proves to show that it took quite a while to have Black creatives come on board and have another example of like Black characters doing good things, doing awesome things, and getting rewarded for doing awesome things. It was pretty nuts. Like, just watching this journey of the Black samurai and this girl with, well, I don't want to say psychic powers, but this girl with powers, because you'll find out at the end of episode 1. It's not a spoiler.
I think
And
like in the first section you find out, the opening scene.
yeah, it was just really, as I found it kind of bizarre how they mixed in all this, like, this sci-fi-ish, like, mind power stuff, yet I was like, okay, we're in for a show, like, because that opening battle, you see these two different forces being pitted against each other. I was like, okay, it set the tone, and you, how do I put this? Like, I was working that day at a friend's house because I didn't have home internet, and it was hard to pay attention to my work. I was just very entertained, and yeah, I'm down for more stuff like this. Like, it was
Dude,
very
man.
engaging, and kudos to LaShawn Thomas to get everybody involved to convince Netflix to uh, make something like this.
And I think that was a part of their goal too, right? To get creatives across the Pacific and from Europe and other places to collaborate. And this is one of their first big ones and stuff like that. So it's interesting how people will take it. And it's interesting that LaShawn Thomas, he took an actual historical figure that many people don't know about. That was a real, Yasuke was a real person in Japan with Nobunaga and stuff like that. And yes, all of it is fiction, but maybe some people make them think about things and maybe research or inspire them and stuff like that. And the other,
Well, it was
sorry
like
about that, Mike. The one last thing I was going to say is for those two, I'm not sure Kevin and Mo can say it later, is Netflix is saying the original language is English, which is interesting.
Yeah,
So, because remember, they do all the languages and stuff like that. So it's interesting that what is a dub? You know what I mean? Like, you can watch it and whatever, and I'm sure that it'll be incredible to watch and stuff like that. I'm not sure if you went dub or sub or if they even had the Japanese up at that point.
I went
I,
with the English dub.
yeah, so did I. I mean, I personally just wanted to hear Lakeith Stanfield, redeem himself after Death Note. But it's
Supposedly, he was a big factor in that one too. He was on board
he's
as an exclusive producer, and so was Lotus.
Flying Lotus.
Yeah, Flying Lotus.
it's to James's point. This is the first when we were talking all those Netflix investing more into anime. This is the first real salvo in all of that. I think.
I feel like this show just,
Right.
despite the craziness of it all, like, there was real substance there, and we can let this show be the representative Black Samurai show instead of Afro Samurai.
agreed. Also, the soundtrack was really cool. I mean, it's got some. I can't wait for the lo-fi beats of this to come out, yo.
Yeah, the music's pretty good. I do feel like they played the opening song during the TV show a little too much, that I started to notice it. Like, it fit in most instances, but I was thinking, okay, like, playing a little too much now, but it's fine.
I mean,
Minor gripe.
I personally skipped the opening after the first time I heard it. For me, openings are always like the beginning of the series and like at the end of the series. In the middle, I can just skip it, and hearing it in the episodes was pretty nice.
One thing that I just wanted to highlight about, you mentioned a little bit about the voice actors. I think it is noteworthy that both the English and the Japanese voice actors are black men. Because a lot of the time, even in Japan, when you do have a black character, they're not voiced by a black actor. And I think that's I don't want I feel horrible saying that's impressive, but I kind of maybe mean that. Um,
Well, can I tell you what I did find it sort of impressive? Nobunaga is played by the same person in both English and Japanese, as far as I could tell.
Yeah, like, the last time I remember a black person voicing a black character was for Dutch and Black Lagoon.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
that's true. Yeah, Black Lagoon, man.
Yeah, that was in the dub, and it was funny because he used to be a pilot, I believe, a bush pilot or something like
Oh,
that. It was
wow.
a crazy story. Like, Hearing him in the extras, it was an incredible thing, his tale.
Okay. So there it is, the first impression or early impressions of Yasuke. Do you want me to mention my guilty pleasure, or just want to get right to
No,
the
real
rest
Mike,
of it?
hit it up. What do you got?
Okay, because the thing is, that wasn't on my plate over the last week. Obviously, it only came on just a few days ago. But what was on my plate this week was the 12 episode 2017 J drama Million Yen Women. That's been there for a while, but I didn't realize that the star of Million Yen Women was Yojiro Noda, the lead vocalist of Radwimps. And obviously, Radwimps is known for something else, for topics we've talked about at length. Didn't know he was acting. I really don't. And that tells you once again how much I had not kept up with things. But there are some names here that sort of caught my attention. Noda, of course, as just mentioned. Rila Fukushima, who was in that. And I know she was in Arrow, she was in The Wolverine. Rina Matsui is in that, a former member of Nogizaka 46. So this became one of those guilty pleasures, kind of a harem / suspense thriller. Is there such a thing?
I guess this show.
Because that's what yeah, that's what this is. That's the best way I could describe this. If nobody has given it a shot yet, I'm pretty sure a handful of people or enough people have, because it's I know it has some good reviews, but if you want a suggestion that of something that you wouldn't think of, there's my suggestion right there. And I would, like, we talked about this last night, where how to, after I finished it, when we were doing the pre-show meeting last night, and there were parts of it I was critical of, and I said that to you guys. But once again, as I think about it again, I lightened up on my criticisms, except for maybe one aspect which I felt ultimately was unnecessary. At best, maybe it was a catalyst, but really I had trouble with, wondering its relevance in the whole thing. But after I finished talking with you guys last night, and then rewatched certain scenes in the show, the more I liked it again. The more I grew to like it. And it's to the point now I would rate this above The Many Faces of Ito, which I mentioned a few months ago. But there's my recommendation, or my guilty pleasure. I think that's the word I was using. But it does lead to some other thoughts. And we're going to start or really get into things this episode. First of all, I know we were joking about trying to do an episode a week in April. We didn't do that, obviously. And the one thing I hate about doing episodes every other week is something always comes up in that off week, and it simmers, and sometimes the stuff is cooled down, and it really isn't worth talking about. That's happened to a couple of different headlines. We are almost on the borderline of the article we're going to talk about in that same sense. So let's start in earnest to a couple weeks ago, and an article the Hollywood Reporter put out about how South Korea and Japan are turning into key battlegrounds, as they put it, concerning the next stage of the streaming wars. Of course, when we talk streaming, the easy name is Netflix, and then essentially everyone else is playing some form of catch up. Specifically, those battlegrounds are in South Korean dramas and Japanese anime. In many respects, we've talked about this, of course, in recent episodes, and they have connected to past stories we have talked about in other forms as well. But it's always good to get a new perspective on this. So the mention of Korean dramas in this article caught my attention, but really shouldn't be surprising when we talk about what's popular in terms of East Asian entertainment exports. But what also caught my attention is how China will fit into this, but not so much as producers, but as consumers as well. And there's a whole load of angles we can take this. And it, as I said, we can end up connecting this to a bunch of other things and a bunch of other stories that have come out in the last week or so, because they sort of connect into this as well. Which way do you want to start? Any, James?
I guess if we're thinking about, like, they were talking about first mover status, and Netflix is really a first mover. They followed the money, they followed the algorithm. I'm not sure. We talked about Yaska and stuff like that. I'm intrigued, I think, as I told you, Mike, what the algorithm tells people after they watch that, where they send them. It's like, is it going to be a Korean drama? Is it going to be a different anime or something like that? And if they continue on the journey, right? That'll be interesting to see.
I mean,
But
we're
First takeaway.
we're assuming that this is data driven, right? We're assuming that Netflix looked at all their data and was like, "Hey, people are watching this, so we should probably put more money into this." Or alternatively, it could just be that not enough people are watching this, so they are putting more money into it, right?
the other thing is, as they said in that article, there's numbers they have in North America and Europe obviously have plateaued and stuff like that. So they have to look at new markets, and they are looking at the Asian market, and they are getting the growth and stuff like that. And you're seeing that because in the Asian market, they said Australia, New Zealand was their biggest market money maker and stuff like that for Netflix. And now it's going to be Japan.
In terms of the Asia
Hmm.
Pacific, yes.
And then it was
So,
interesting. They were talking about other deals, obviously, that are coming in behind. We're talking about HBO Max, and we're talking about Disney Plus. And I think for HBO Max on the Warner side, it was interesting them talking about South Korea and how they were thinking of investing and making a large minority out of the one K-pop company. I think it was Hybe.
Hybe,
the company that
Yeah, it
HYBE,
was
owned
Hybe.
that
formerly
Hmm.
Big Hit Entertainment, who
in
who is now the house of, well, always has been, but is the house that
BTS.
BTS made. Yes.
And they were saying that would help
Mhm.
them in the K-pop area and stuff like that. That would be a big win for them.
Yeah, but now you're hearing stories about not just Netflix, but every other seemingly overseas, maybe North American based entertainment conglomerate taking an investment of
And
some sort
Disney, they said
there.
for Disney Plus, is looking at it in the angle of their properties, and they're not going to be doing like tons of shows. Like, say, for example, Netflix is investing where they're getting the stages in South Korea for the dramas, and then they're getting stages even in Japan for live action there. That it's going to be based on what works for them, and those high percentage type shows they think will be wins for them. And we've seen them doing it this week. I think I talked to you guys about how Marvel and Viz are bringing over to North America some of the manga that was published on Marvel properties, and that involved the Deadpool Samurai and the Marvel Meow. And so those are big things for the media mix, I think, for them and stuff like that. And I could see that happen for them to bring it over and talk to collaborators in Asia for that as well. So.
Well, I think you hit something there, the way I look at it. It's always, when it comes to talking Disney in this realm, you have to talk about, will it fit Disney? Like, Disney has its brand, and I get it. They sometimes go branch off into other labels, as as you can see with Star here with Disney Plus outside of the US. But in the end, it's still about a fit for the core
It's
name and
weird
all of
because I
that.
think in Disney we always think, or we always thought, family friendly, the House of Mouse, and so on and so forth. But now when they bought Marvel and stuff like that, and how Marvel now fits in, and how, for example, LucasArts fits in, it's kind of changed the dynamics in my mind.
Well, it changed the makeup of the core, really,
Hmm.
right? I mean, I think that's what we're getting at when it comes to
And
how
it
Disney
isn't
fits into
like, oh,
this.
we're going to add a new thing at Disneyland or Disney World and stuff like that with Marvel characters or with Star Wars characters. I'm sure they will, obviously.
They
But
already have. There's Star Tours as a huge Star Wars element of the Disney parks. I think Marvel they're still planning, but they're planning like a integrated world Avengers campus things across their different parks. So I think with Marvel they're still catching up a little bit, but with Disney or with Star Wars, I think the last couple years they opened and they've been doing stage shows for about a year before that, I think.
Well, I mean, let's not forget Disney makes most of its money not from Marvel or Star Wars, but from their parks, right? I mean, pre-COVID,
Yeah.
obviously.
it's just interesting to
Mhm.
see how you put that, I guess, in the family friendly perspective, right? Because that's what you think of when you think of Disney. It's like they're for everyone.
I think that the advantage that both Star Wars and Marvel has when it comes to family friendly is that all you really have to do is ignore little bits and they become fine. Like Star Wars has always been, huge with kids from 2 to 70. But with something like Marvel, all you really have to do is say, let's not talk about the Punisher, and almost everything else can at least be, filtered to be friendly to, the kids crowd.
Hmm. I don't know how to reply to it myself. I mean, I'd have to think about that one. How to
Well, like
digest
even
that
think about the
that thought.
marketing, right? As long as these superhero movies have been popular, or even beforehand, little kids would always have the Hulk hands toys. Something like Spider-Man is Marvel, and that's always been popular with kids. It's only really kind of the nuances of the actual comics that during certain time periods and periods of comics, superhero comics in particular, history, where darker elements come into play. But there's been kid-friendly versions of these media or these franchises, as long as they've existed.
And let's not forget, no
Yeah.
one actually reads the Marvel
Right.
comics anymore, right?
Comparatively, not as many people.
Comparative. No, I think I understand where Mo's going because that's one of those watching a movie or watching literature but not understanding the books. It's like watching the Harry Potter movies but not watching reading the Harry Potter books.
Yeah,
Kind of
exactly.
making me think on that one because we're talking about the floppies versus that. It's almost remember we were talking about that and Roland Kelts was talking about it in regards to you have the anime inspired and then the authentic Japanese anime and stuff like that. It almost fits into that in a way.
Oh, that the whole argument that the upcoming schism he thinks could happen in
Mm.
fandom. Is that
Yeah,
what you're
in a
referring
way,
to?
but you never know. Some people may be watching the anime inspired, and maybe Yasuke is that. It's like, who knows? It's like many creators came to create, I think, a great piece of art, it sounds like, from what Kevin and Mo said. You know what I mean? So I don't think you should really
Hmm.
pigeonhole it, even though people like to, right?
I think I'd agree with you. It's just human nature says we do. And you're right. We should be able to have your cake and eat it too, so to speak. We can try to understand different approaches. So why not? Because it gives us another view of what of
Plus, let's not forget,
main
people don't like to eat vegetables, man. Come on. I mean, I'm not actively seeking out vegetables to eat. I want some cake.
You're saying you're not
no.
actively seeking the Moe anime, Mo?
We know where we're going here. So okay, let's start on a couple different angles and how the battlegrounds are or the battle lines are being drawn in this sense. And I'll also speak a little bit anecdotally too. And that anecdote had me thinking a few years ago, what's the most popular role or the role that made Jet Li famous, at least
Is
to
it
most
one?
people?
That one with Jason Statham?
You're just wasting time here, aren't you, Mo? But it does start with the word one, sort of. It was when he played Wang Fei Hong in the Once Upon a Time in China series almost 30 years ago. That's, I think, where we really started to know about Jet Li. And obviously, if you know enough, you know Wang Fei Hong, the character he played, is a folk hero, and it seems the rite of passage for every single martial arts star to have come out of Hong Kong to have played either him or a character or person associated with him in one form or another. Jackie Chan has done it. Yan Bu, one of Jackie Chan's best friends, has done it. Not necessarily Wang Fei Hong, but a character associated. Sammo Hung, one of Jackie Chan's best friends, has done it, but another associate of Wang Fei Hong. And then others have played maybe Wang Fei Hong's father, Wang Ke-ying, which leads me to something I remember hearing about a few years ago, maybe about 5 years ago. HBO did a made-for-TV movie that, as far as I know, is only exclusive to the Asian region that chronicled a story surrounding Wang Ke-ying. So I just want to start to illustrate where that the investment's coming in, and maybe also just one other key thing. And I don't know which order we'll tackle these couple of points. One, anime, and this is almost unrelated now. Anime is a must-have for platforms to work in Japan. That's one point. We can address that a bit later. But the other one was more interesting. Korean pop, Korean shows making inroads in China for a period. And then, because of political climates and because of the South Korean military making moves towards more better associations with the US, China closed off its market to Korean pop items, Korean dramas, Korean pop. A blanket ban on Korean pop. And that opened the doors for Korean studios to take investments and interest from elsewhere. That sort of opened up the Netflix side. And now China all of a sudden is doubling back, trying to get their hands back in that pot as well, making agreement with state broadcasters in China and Korea, making agreements with each other in terms of various exchanges and impossible investments. So that leads to my thought on where China will fit into this as a possible investor, as a possible producer, and as a consumer. Like where would they fit? Those are two questions I sort of
Sounded
have.
like in that article that they're
Like it's a
competing
mishmash.
for the K-pop stars and stuff like that now, and the K-drama stars to a degree, because they had the deep freeze because of years back with the missile defense and that being put on the Korean peninsula and stuff like that, and then the political temperature China being what they were, as you said, that they said no more
And
imports. And
frankly still are.
we've seen that culture is a big thing in this, because they're like, okay, you're trying to influence us with this, or so on and so forth. And it goes back and forth, whether it's the West or China or Russia or so on and so forth. But
Yeah. This is a story. This is an angle, by the way, to keep an eye on for the future. And I know we're going to talk about this way into the future, but China, I know, seemingly has a certain wariness about influences from other nearby nations, especially Japan, obviously. So they try and cultivate their own. I mean, this is one of those dichotomies. Remember when Matt Alt slammed the idea of cool Japan because it meant it worked on the idea it's a government agency or a government initiative telling you what's cool from Japan, when that's not how Japanese pop culture, whether it's anime, music, video games, that's not how it worked. That's not how it got to that point. That was organic. But in many respects, any other country wanting to promote their culture in the region, whether it's Taiwan, whether it's Hong Kong, whether it's China, whether it's South Korea, they're playing from behind. They have to force the issue. In many respects, they do have to need some sort of institution to help push it. And China, in China's case, they have to push it on themselves, because whatever organic may have existed from Japan has worked. So they're playing catch up in that sense, and that's something I think an aspect I think to keep
And
up
they
with
do
in
have
the
the money,
future.
Mike, because we know they have invested in different movies and stuff like that from the US side. And people have questioned that too. It's like, okay, what cuts or what compromises are being made? And sometimes it is just the Chinese version. And that is the question mark that's going to come with maybe some of the money coming into the Korean dramas, but maybe that won't be as much of an effect because maybe it'll be like one of the Chinese broadcasters, one of the Korean broadcasters, and then one of the streaming partners, maybe Netflix, being on that one committee to produce that show and stuff like that.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, let me give you another anecdote, okay? I was also flipping around on Omni, and we've talked Omni, or at least I have over the years. And you know what I ended up seeing? One night, just just stumbled on it. A Mandarin version of the hit 90s sitcom Mad About You. Sony was able to sell the premise to a Chinese television producer, and they took select episodes from it and made their own version of Mad About You in Chinese. And funny enough, it starred a real life couple.
Really? Holy smokes. It's like of all
Yeah,
the
yeah,
sitcoms
double
you could
checked
have
it.
chosen from that era. Think about that.
Yeah, maybe because it was fairly apolitical too. So they picked and choose the episodes that they thought would work, and they redid it into Mandarin. I mean, we've seen these before. Obviously, we hear about British sitcoms being adapted to North America. We don't hear a lot about a North American original being adapted somewhere overseas. I only know personally could recall two cases specifically. Mad About You is one of them. The other was Who's the Boss? Who's the Boss, I think in the 90s itself, was adapted into a British sitcom as well called The Upper Hand. And Honor Blackburn, the late great Bond girl, she starred in that version in the role that Katherine Hellman made famous. But I don't know of too many, to be honest, and that was my point. I don't know too many North American titles that might have gotten an adaptation overseas. It's always the other way around, and more often than not, it ends up falling flat. Just ask any adaptation based on a manga.
I think you've been saying about kind of the idea of what do you know about, what have you heard of, is really interesting when you look at both South Korea and Japan. Because if you look at Japanese, media, whether that is music or fictional media like manga and anime, or especially video games, they have such this I guess capital, like cultural capital, but kind of on the undercurrents, right? Like the different subcultures that exist. Like even Japanese video games, they're not the kind of video games that, at least for the most part, that mainstream people will talk about. But if you look at South Korea, they've really managed to break into the mainstream really successfully. Like they are featured on talk shows and other North American kinds of TV when people are talking about them. Average people, that sounds mean, but like, everyday people who wouldn't necessarily think about the sort of geeky or nerdy type of things, they're aware of K-pop, they're aware of Parasite, they're aware to some degree of other K-dramas, um, in a way that they wouldn't be aware of even some of the more mainstream Japanese properties, like say Dragon Ball.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, and I know we've had a version of this before, but can somebody remind me how that happened? How was it that K-pop and K-dramas became so popular outside of Korea? How did that happen? Was it also partly an embrace by the producers there? I think it was. Well, I remember now, a month or so ago, we were talking about K-pop and how producers made it a point to be able to make their beats so that they ended up appealing overseas. Something to that effect.
I don't know
Somebody
what the
remind me.
trigger is, but I feel like on top of making the music in a similar style as Western music. I feel like Korean companies were a lot more receptive to hosting their music on YouTube and letting it be more accessible for fans.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
And going
so
to
the
LA
embrace, so
too
the
as well.
Oh yeah.
Like,
so the embrace argument has merit in
I mean,
that
it's
sense.
it's the age old thing where like if you build it, they'll come. Or no, not build it. Sorry, if you make it accessible enough, the audience will eventually come, and people will find it, and slowly but surely it'll grow in popularity, right?
Yeah. So let's go to Japan for a couple minutes then. And remember, the phrase we used there more often than not was kicking and
Yeah.
screaming. We say that about anime and the Netflix investment. And this is and remember, Netflix's moves are similar to what we think is happening in manga and anime in Japan itself, in its own domestic market. Netflix's share in its home markets has plateaued and is even lowering. They have to look somewhere else, much like consumers in Japan for anime and manga. They're growing old, they're dying, low birth rate. They have to look at other places. What compromises are you going to make to be able to get to those other markets? Netflix is doing their homework on that. They're investing. And then it kind of clashes with the market, with what Japanese producers are facing. They have to compromise kicking and screaming, right? And now there's money, or seemingly there's money, and this is probably part of the other issues that are facing the industry too, because we've said seemingly everything could be shrinking in Japan, including the workforce, for just generally speaking, but especially for our discussion in things like anime and manga. Because remember, it was never well paying in the first place. Why would anyone want to put themselves through that stress, give themselves an ulcer to be a mangaka, an animator? It doesn't pay well. You could seemingly flip burgers and at least be on the right track in that sense, financially. Pays more to get more into the video game side. But now with the money coming in, they need workers. That's the problem.
the
And
question is, they're ramping up, right,
like,
Mike? So you think about that,
yeah, they're
and it's
ramping
like,
up.
will they find the workers there in Japan highly skilled? That's the
They
question:
better
is, will they find the skilled workers there, or are they going to have to go
they
to other places like they have before? Because they've went to China, they've went to Vietnam, they've went to the Philippines, they've went to Korea and stuff like that.
and now they have to come back, and they now sort of have to come back. They now sort of have to come back, but train may have left the station, at least for a generation. And like, here's the thing: money could be flowing in, and we talked about the whole dilemma of the production committee and how its trickle effect never really does work for the actual animators and producers there, to the actual
That's
studios.
why it's interesting, for example, for
And
Yasuke, something like that, and maybe future productions. How is that going to work? Because is there really a committee there?
right,
It's Netflix.
right. And the thing is, if you're expecting to think the money distribution is status quo, just like everything else, more like it, changing tone here, it may not be sustainable if you're going to just try and think that you can treat everybody the same way. Because if the producers, the animators don't, if their cut doesn't improve, what's the point of them wanting to be in it? Just a thought. That's my thing. That's where I'm starting to think about here.
And then it depends too,
Like, I
right, Mike?
mean,
It's like
that's
I'm thinking
that.
about Yasuke, and it's like Mappa was the one that animated, so they gave the money to Mappa. Did it make it down to the animators? That's the question in my mind still, because we've always been asking that.
Mhm. Yeah, well, we've been asking that since we started talking about it over the pandemic series. By the way, happy anniversary to the pandemic series, since we're now in May. And We started the pandemic series in May. This weekend actually, right? So happy anniversary, guys, in that sense. Okay, let me give one final thought before we end this off. Because there's a whole load of other thoughts, and I don't think we have time to go through this. This is where it starts to get interesting. And now my train of thought could be almost gone. Oh, here it is. Netflix again, and really any other Western-based streaming platform, or more specifically, ones outside of China. Because remember, China has its own domestic services. They'll give preference to that. Netflix is not there. Netflix is not there at the moment, right? So where does stopping short of being able to get into China, what's in it for Netflix concerning China? And I think this is the way how, like, making all these deals, whether it's in South Korean dramas, whether it's in Japanese anime, by having the rights to that is to make sure they get something out of it should those same properties that they're investing in
Well, yeah, I
get
mean,
into
if you
China.
bet on every horse in the race, you're bound to win something, right?
And they'll be on Billy
Right.
or something like that, right? So, and if they are on the
Mm-hmm.
committee, then they'll get at least a bit of a share, and that's a big, even if it's a small bit, it's still a big bit of the pie for China because that's over 1 billion people.
Right. And it's
And we've
important for
seen
them
that with
still.
movies too,
That's what's
right?
in that's
Where
what
basically they flop
right.
here,
And
but
that's
then somehow they made their money somewhere else, like for example, China.
well, Us and Them. Remember the Chinese movie I mentioned way back at the beginning of a couple of years ago? A couple of years ago I mentioned it. That was a Chinese movie. That was a hit Chinese movie. Netflix, that was a Netflix original. They invested in it, and then they were able to turn around and be able to sell it to a Chinese streamer there, where it was a hit. And that's the scenarios that I think Netflix want to go with as it proceeds in this thing. Just food for thought in all of this. And can I give one more thought? Because I just brought up such a series. What about Japanese live action dramas? Because okay, and once again, there's my bias showing as an anime fan because I took such great interest in watching Japanese dramas because of my own interest in Japanese anime. The clubs here in Toronto, they took a chance on showing fan subs of Japanese dramas back in the day, back in the 90s and in the mid aughts. Has that train left the station in terms of a Japanese drama really becoming things? Can it get to the level of the popularity of South Korean dramas? What does it need to do? Or is it because of their own kicking and screaming hesitancy, it'll never catch up? Because there's some good shows out there. There's been good shows from the 90s, from the aughts, that I think people would have loved to see. See the Densha Otoko TV series, see Long Vacation. Those were two key benchmarks in the 90s and the aughts. And we get hints of that in some of those actors
Unless
in the various Netflix dramas we see. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, unless it's based on an existing property or there's some incredibly unique premise, I think that the train is several stations away at this point.
Yeah, and I think that might have been the case with Million Yen Women. That was based on a manga and has some noteworthy musicians as stars, and Rila Fukushima, who has made some inroads in North American movies, as I mentioned earlier. Just going back to the to that example. Sorry, Kevin.
I think that they need to just let these shows come out more frequently, and I believe that that is starting to happen. Make your shows more accessible. I think that now you have like all these like stipulations of, oh, we can't show this actor's face in promotions, all that Johnny's BS. Like that needs to stop.
I think we're reaching a light at the end of the tunnel in that sense. I'd like to think so anyway.
Yeah, because Johnny's dead.
Well, yeah, that's a fair statement. No, it's a fair, yeah, factual
It's
and
a
fair.
factual
Yeah, go
statement.
ahead,
I
Kevin.
can't argue that.
I just feel like there needs to have that. There needs to be that, like, this build up. They need that build up of like discussion and like fan engagement and like accessibility just needs to happen. And I know it's ever so slowly opening up, but stop uploading frigging 2-minute preview music videos and just give me the damn music video on YouTube. Like that needs to be a thing. That needs to stop.
I
Like
think it's the
shit like
kicking and
that. Make it accessible, man. Wha- you wonder why like it's your stuff isn't catching on these days. Like that's why.
kicking and screaming, right?
It's
I
the
thought they were trying to reach out because we saw the news on the anime side from Netflix. Maybe they'll do it for the live action, but their new VTuber star that is a human, was it a sheep human life form born in California? Enko.
I don't know what. Yeah, I just saw that before we started taping. I don't totally know what to make of it yet, but that might be my midlife crisis self speaking.
Well, they'll
I think it was more, as many people said, hello, fellow kids.
hey, VTubers is a pretty interesting phenomenon. I
Yeah, so trying to, I can understand that in that sense. I can understand why they do it. I just don't know what to make of it yet because I saw the initial video and I think what did they give the character's name? What's the character's name? But it was like 3 minutes, and she only spoke. She's supposed to be bilingual, but I think she only spoke less than 30 seconds in English.
the interesting
Yeah,
thing.
so it was Enko.
Kevin,
Oh, I was gonna say the interesting thing with VTubers is that as a viewer, you know that there's a person behind the fictional character, but
mm-hmm.
then there are times when like there are times when the actor or actress behind the persona slips and like they let little bits of their personal life slip because there's usually a narrative that you have with these VTubers, but sometimes they'll forget briefly and then a part of their real self comes out and people find that endearing.
I wonder how the company finds that, because as we know, it's kind of like the J-pop stars and stuff like that, that they kind of are managed to a degree.
Yeah.
But this one's interesting because it's a Netflix employee,
Yeah,
right?
by and
And they joke it's like the information that only Netflix employees know, and they will share it with us.
by and large, for the impression I've been getting is that the agents are usually okay with this.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, cover. Yeah, because I know they were having a brouhaha about uh, one of the recent animes this week showing a character that looked like a popular VTuber and stuff like that, and they were on them like no tomorrow.
Mm.
Like it's going to be erased from future broadcasts and Blu-ray and stuff like that. It was like How to Summon a Demon Lord or
Something like that.
something to that effect. The second season, and it was one of the more popular VTubers recently. It's like a cat girl, and it was similar image, that's for sure. Braided ponytails, carrots in the braids, and
Oh.
then
Yeah.
stuff like
Okay.
that.
Anyway, there's I got all ranty there. Sorry. But there's, as I said, lots of angles, lots of thoughts. Thank you for mentioning the VTuber on that, James. Because seriously, because that's another development this week.
I hate to tell you, Mike, it's like we may talk about these things, but VTubers and the NFTs, I'm still scratching my head on them. So I don't think people our age, Mike, will be able to understand them ever. But hey, if you enjoy it,
Who am I
great.
talking? I
Except maybe the NFTs. I'll have to agree with Jeff on that. Probably not so much.
Bill Maher did a solid like 5 minute piece on this yesterday, like perfectly explaining it for anyone over the age of like older than a millennial, I guess, or the old millennials. But it's pretty funny, man.
Yuppies. Okay. Well, send me the link. Okay. Anyway, let me end this thought, and then obviously the debate will continue, and I know we'll see it. We'll be talking about this in some other form at some point in the likely near future. 2 tweets. Justin Savakis, in talking about this article, tweeted out, I have so many mixed feelings about all this international money flowing into what was once a weird, artistically interesting, and auteur-driven medium. OTOH, that ship sailed a decade ago. On the other hand, that's what it means. Matt Alt basically quoted the last line in his book, Pure Invention, A Planet of Dreamers Made in Japan.
That was interesting because it was in relation to the big box office hits last week that we might talk about quickly in the next segment.
Nice segue. But let me also, there's one other point I want to make before we end it. But yeah, maybe that's a good way to end all this off. I just know we'll be talking about this. Oh wait, tweet out of context. Yes, tweet out of context. Planet of Dreamers Made in Japan. Matt Alt put that tweet up in relation to showing the final numbers from last weekend's box office in North America. My apologies, Matt. I'm really, really sorry about that. So tweet out of context right there. And I guess we'll talk about that in a few seconds. So when we return, yes, we'll talk about the box office, albeit briefly. We'll talk about novels. We'll talk about wrestling. We'll talk about Ghibli live action. And maybe we'll talk a little Voltron when we go through the headlines in brief. The bullets up next when the Anime Roundtable continues. It's the Six Talk Podcast Network. And the podcast now continues in front of a virtual audience. Thank you for listening, and online via the Six Talk Podcast Network, the official podcast of Anime North. Nicolas, Austin, Ing, Sharmarke, Greig, continuing the conversation with you. Okay, is there a follow-up to the first segment you guys want to express before we move on?
Yeah, watch Yasuke.
Cool.
Yes.
Yeah, because
I heard
you guys
Demon
were all
Slayer
talking.
is
Yeah, because
popular.
you guys were friggin' spoiling it during the break.
I'm sorry, it's one of those things where like it's kind of hard not to spoil. I mean, there's more to it than just the Black Samurai guys. Just gotta watch it.
That'll be probably on my list this week. We want to add anything else?
And then watch it again.
Well, I mean, back to the whole Japanese drama thing too, I guess. Well, there isn't really much else to add. I get the feeling we'll come back to it anyway in some form. Yeah, maybe the train did leave the station on the older titles.
Yeah, I honestly think it has. Like, does anybody talk about any of those older shows? Like maybe GTO, maybe Hanayori Dango.
Fair point. I'll tell a story I know in the future, though, just give a thought, okay?
It'll be interesting to see what future evergreen titles are actually evergreen, because they're just pumping them out now, unlike before, right? Where there were only so many and you had to pick and choose.
Well,
and
I think
people would trade their favorite series, like Cowboy Bebop and those ones back in the day.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think whatever, and coming back, just juxtaposing this with my whole thought on Japanese dramas, the few that were able to come out became evergreen. So that's so for if we're going to ever re-see anything old, it'll be what we consider evergreen, because for whatever reason, fandom or their ties to an established work that did make it in North America or outside of Japan. for that matter.
You hear more talk with movies. Like, you definitely will have. There is like a niche crowd for Japanese movies, but yeah, I think it's gonna take a while.
TV dramas is I think they're playing from behind there.
I think it's just a commitment issue, right? I mean, a movie is more prestige. You'll see it at festivals and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only maybe at 2-3 hours of your time.
Yeah, unless you're that dude who makes long movies. I don't know.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of those too. Anyway, so you ready to go? Ready to really dive into the second segment?
Yes.
Okay, and you know what we do in the second segment typically? We lock and load. It's time for headlines in brief, the bullets. Little things which may become big things. I think we could go of the 5. 4 of them could be a rather significant discussion. Maybe 3. I'm hoping 3. Okay. Once again, referring to my tweet out of context or reading a tweet out of context, Matt Alt, A Planet of Dreamers made in Japan, and he puts up a graphic of last weekend's North American box office. Mortal Kombat, 23.3 million. Demon Slayer, the movie, 21.1 million. Godzilla vs. Kong, which was number 1 by default pretty much the week before, or as they say in Italian, defaulto, 4.3 million in third place. Okay, that joke fell flat. Any thoughts? Because I think this is basically what we're going to see this weekend as well.
Yeah, they said it's neck and neck with Mortal Kombat and Demon Slayer again, and I'm sure Aniplex and Funimation are happy because supposedly they only spent about 400,000 US on marketing, and one of it was on like putting a wrap around a subway train in LA to go around and stuff like that. So they made quite a lot of money compared to any other anime movie before, I would think.
So real return on investment. Small investment, really.
And the other interesting thing is we talk about made in Japan, stuff like that, inspired by Japan. And I think people forget in regards to Mortal Kombat, yes, it was made in the States, but you couldn't have had that in the 90s and stuff like that without the scene in Japan, without Osaka, without SNK and Capcom and those fighting games that really popularized in the arcades and stuff like that.
Yeah, without Street Fighter 2 in particular, I think.
Yeah, definitely Street Fighter 2, and then of course King of Fighters, and there's so many others. But I guess people kind of forget that in a way, right?
Well,
When was the last time anyone like played at one of those cabinet arcade face to face, that type of situation?
it depends. How many are left?
God,
Hardly.
true.
Might have been York University.
Oh, man.
When they still
Pacific
had
Valley
them.
I don't
check out
think
this-
that's still around, but yeah,
No,
they
no,
had
no,
the
that's long
arcades,
gone.
remember, in the mall, yeah. It was-
Yeah, York University's closed, I think, when I was still there, like my final year there. But I think that might have been the last. I mean, I'm not a huge fighting game person, but
But it was so nice. You
that
sat
was-
down on the whole thing. You had a person like, it was fun, bro. Come on.
And I think they had the verse cabinets too, where you could be on either side. You don't see
Yep.
those as much in
Yeah.
the North American market, remember?
And depending on who you ask, it's dwindling a fair amount overseas as well.
Yeah, even in Japan, I think that is not nearly as popular as it used to be.
Mm-hmm. Fair point.
It is interesting, like, those top 3, like with the Japan connection of Mortal Kombat that you can make. It must be like a really weird moment for normal movie people to have like a fighting game adaptation, an anime feature, and Godzilla. We're in a box office situation where Godzilla is the most mainstream movie on that list. It's kind of interesting that the pandemic kind of as far as movies goes, the pandemic kind of started with Sonic the Hedgehog and is restarting with all these kind of nerd properties to some degree.
Yeah.
I guess
Well-
what that means, the Oscars are going to be even more interesting next year.
Well,
Or you
enough-
could say it'll be interesting to think about movie critics and how they would feel about For example,
it'll be.
back in the day, if Siskel and Ebert had to go in, and those were the three movies they had to review for a weekend.
Enough Oscar bait style stuff is still going to be released, even if it's just on streaming.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, well, that's
For
part
sure.
of
No,
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it'll definitely be through the streaming, even though there were so many people definitely against that. We know about Spielberg and all that, right? They said never, and look what happened.
Either that or get left behind. Train leaves the station. And in the case of Godzilla versus Kong, once again, two sweetest words in the English language, according to Homer Simpson. Default. But yeah, basically the top three is probably in no doubt for this weekend. The only question is in which order.
And it's interesting that Demon Slayer, I know we talked about how it would do in North America and all this stuff, and I guess it would have done well, but it definitely looks like it's been having some extra juice, and now Viz is giving out the first volume digitally.
Oh
So
yes,
I
well
guess it's
I
going to
picked
be
up my
more of a
copy. Yes.
phenomenon than we thought.
Mhm. Well,
Is the Demon Slayer movie accessible for anyone who hasn't seen the series?
Good question.
Ooh, kind
good
of
question.
tough because the movie is a direct continuation of the series.
Yeah, that's a fair. That's probably it.
So I think that's even more impressive for Demon Slayer that, it's not an anime adaptation or a retelling, like some of the Evangelion movies or something like that. It's just from what you've said, kind of a an ongoing part of it or a sequel or whatever you want to call it, but it's still managing to go toe to toe with huge, North American studios.
Well, I think a key thing is that if you want to get the background, it's pretty accessible if you have a Netflix account because the TV series is there. Mo,
Oh, I was gonna say. I mean, for this weekend, I mean, let's not forget what just was released yesterday, the 15th anniversary screening of one Canadian but not Canadian enough rebroadcasting of Scott Pilgrim versus the World. I think that's gonna take number one spot in the box office. Personally,
10th anniversary.
sorry, 10th anniversary. Yeah,
Well, that's out there.
yeah.
We'll see how that does. But then it's a very nerd property. So Matt Alt's tweet just as quickly applies.
True,
I
true.
think.
Yeah, it definitely was a cult status thing and stuff like that for that series. And it
Mhm.
probably is good to get it out there too, because remember Ubisoft and them re-released the video game in January for all platforms, for recent
Cool.
platforms.
Oh,
And
that's
even the graphic novels are manga, like they're not manga format as far as reading direction, but they're, size wise essentially manga format. So, with Brian Lee O'Malley, there's, lots of clear, Japanese video games and manga inspirations and elements there.
The influence is there definitely, right?
Even,
right.
yeah, and even in
No,
the
of course.
movie.
Well, once again, Planet of Dreamers made in Japan. That's
And
all
he
you can
did
really say.
hang out at the Beguiling, and Chris Butcher inspired a character in the graphic novel as well, of course, because I think they were roommates. That was one of the things I remember. Yes, they were.
Okay. Well, let's see how the numbers turn out and settle on Monday, or at the end of Sunday, more like it, before this episode comes out. All right, let's move on. Just quickly. Item: Kadokawa Corporation acquires U.S. publishing company J Novel Club. Can somebody tell me the point of this? Because Kadokawa has their hands in Yen Press already, too.
So, from the sounds of it, uh, looking at the J Novel Club press release, it looks like it wasn't a straight buyout, but they did buy a majority stake in J Novel Club. And looking at Sam Panansky's comments, some people may know him as the former founder of Anime Souls. He wrote that he needed a strong partner to guarantee their future growth, and he found one in Bookwalker and Kadokawa. What I'm curious about is that you have J Novel Club putting out light novels, and then you have Yen Press putting out light novels. So I feel like there's a little bit of a redundancy there, but
Yeah,
I
that's
don't
what I
know.
was thinking.
I don't know what
There
In
you
is a
the
think
bit,
though,
but I
James.
see where Sam was coming, and he's still going to keep his share and stuff like that. It's good to see that he has done well and stuff like that. He isn't rolling in the Funimation money when they were doing their successive buyouts and stuff like that.
But the
But
man got
he
paid.
was able to actually grow this business because when he was with Anime Souls, it was the Japanese corporations and stuff like that, and he had a slim budget. But this one, he actually grew himself, and he
Exactly.
believed in it. And he said, I can take these light novels, I can get them on the digital platform, then get them the digital copy, and then he grew it into the physical books and stuff like that. Then he grew it into selling manga as well, doing it similar formula where you have your membership and you get a chapter a week, so to speak. And then once it's done, you have the digital release. And then if it's good enough, it's really popular, you'll get later on down the line a physical book release, which is an interesting model. You don't see it as much. And I think that is something on the digital side, digital first. That's what Katakawa is looking at. And they made mention of that. Yes, they have Bookwalker, but I think they're looking at this digital first strategy and maybe putting some of those light novels or manga that they have in the future pipeline, maybe putting them on the J novel site first, so to speak. So that could be a part of the pipeline because J novel, Sam was saying in the FAQs as well, nothing is going to change. That this is to strengthen them going forward and to actually compete for those bids for titles and stuff like that.
I think once again, remember I told the story of Future Shop and Best Buy 15 some odd years ago here in Canada, and I think I sort of start to think along the similar lines here. Kadokawa decided to buy in to an at least better established, if not fully established, but certainly further along distribution structure that they held interest in, i.e., digital. They wanted a piece of it. They think they would have had problems establishing their own version of it, so they bought one. Or at least it was certainly easier to do so.
And they did have Bookwalker, so that is the thing, but I'm not sure how well Bookwalker is done for them. They're still obviously going to keep that, but they've made deals with other publishers for that platform. For example, I know Kodansha, some of their digital only titles they have put on Bookwalker, and some of them are exclusive to Bookwalker for a few of them.
Okay.
Oh.
And
All right.
I guess some of the thoughts too is similar to what Kevin worried about earlier on is talked about, and I thought about is Kodansha and a lot of their series staying digital only or kind of testing the grounds with digital first and then saying, you know what, we're just going to leave it digital or something like that, or longer series just being digital only. And we haven't seen that from Katakawa with Yen Press, but it'll be interesting to see how it moves forward and stuff like that, especially since they have a really nice pipeline in J Novel to get the digital first through basically kind of like the Crunchyroll model we wanted, right? Where we can read it for a bit and then if we like it, we can get the digital copy later, or if it's really popular, maybe hopefully we'll get that physical copy.
Once again, the word algorithm comes into play. Surely they'll keep up with what's popular amongst all that.
Mm-hmm.
Surely they'll have the means to do so, and obviously that'll tell a few tales and where something could go in the future. It's an intriguing acquisition for sure. I just don't like. I'm not as much in the know. That's why I asked you two. Go ahead, Kevin.
Another concern that I've been seeing in the comments of the ANN article is that people are worried that because J Novel Club has their DRM free approach to their releases, whereas Bookwalker is the opposite of that. People are concerned whether or not the DRM free aspect of that will disappear or not.
And they mentioned that in the FAQ sounded, and for now, nothing's going to happen, but obviously that doesn't mean much for the future, right? But we'll see
Mm-hmm.
what happens. It's more of stay tuned, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Okay.
But as we know, some of this it's money, 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 and they need a sugar daddy to continue with the arms race, right? Because that's what has happened in the manga field. A lot of them have those connections to some Japanese corporations or someone that can help them out. It's kind of ironic in a way that Tokyo Pop, remember, has shrunken to where they are and stuff like that because they just don't have the connections and they're just in it with a certain niche and they do what they want with targeted titles.
Spin those discs, DJ Melky. Okay.
I'm hopeful in one thing in the future is like as long as the J Novel website can continue as is and that idea can continue on, I like to see more titles come to that because Crunchyroll had an opportunity to do their approach that they did with anime for the manga market, and they only got a few Kodansha titles, and then after that, it's like they forgot they had a manga section on their website, and
Yeah.
that would have been nice to actually go and read it in that streaming type profile and stuff like that instead of buying it chapter by chapter.
Missed opportunities, perhaps.
100%. Like, I am not paying for chapter by chapter releases.
Okay. I get where you're going.
I mean, if the chapter by chapter release is maybe exclusive or has some kind of collector ish behind it, maybe, I guess.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, who knows? As I said, there isn't much I could really add to this. So thanks for giving some thorough thoughts there, James, Kevin, and giving a thought here there, Mo. Item: WWE president says WWE sells multi-episode anime series to Crunchyroll, and it's very short on details here. Just said that that's been done, and that the WWE likes to expand its brand beyond the ring. So it focused on developing a slate of original programming from WWE Studio, I guess seemingly for their streaming service, which is now on Peacock in the States. So because that's been now tied to Universal, but it's still an independent thing just about everybody everywhere else. I mean, remember, the one thing that kind of comes to mind when I read that part of the statement was the pivot that they were forced to make about 20 years ago when they renamed themselves from WWF World Wrestling Federation to WWE World Wrestling Entertainment. That name really doesn't stand out as much anymore. I mean, I sort of start to think of it that way. And I respected the pragmatic reasoning behind the name when they lost a bunch of court cases for starters. But
To the panda bear.
yes, to the panda bear, because pandas rule. But
Don't get me
when
started on.
they finally revealed their new name, their new corporate name to this, and they got criticized, they mentioned they had been branching out, and it had been long established that pro wrestling was fake, wasn't real competition, it was scripted, fake in that sense. Although Mick Foley will say real life is faker. So this is kind of in line with the thinking that was presented 20 years ago to me. And if you want to go further on the anime side, just remember which one of the things you used to see at Anime North, a wrestling ring. And there's a lot of overlap between pro wrestling fandom and anime fandom too. It somewhat surprises you. And you see that at Anime North. I know Daryl Surat goes on and on about pro wrestling. Plus, in many respects, it has me thinking of Hana Kimura again, the late female pro wrestler. So those type of thoughts all come in. But that all said, this particular thing seems very vague on details.
I think it's very early to say the least because they reached out to Crunchyroll, Anime News Network, and they said the company declined to comment at this time. So It's probably a very early in development title at the moment compared to their other Crunchyroll originals.
I wonder what to expect though.
Well, they have a lot of ideas they could work off of because, as you said, there are many of the wrestlers in the WWE that are big fans of video games and of anime, and have those outsized personalities. So they have a lot they could work off of.
Well, you had me thinking, and I forgot his name now, but one half of New Day, one of the tag teams in WWE, is now
Xavier
also.
Woods.
He said, "Thank you." Xavier Woods has been tapped to be a host on G4 when that reemerges from the Universal archives sometime this year, and because he's such a video game player, and perfect fit there in that sense. What I wonder will if we'll end up seeing is something like Hulk Hogan's Rock and Wrestling, and that's dating myself because we're talking an early '80s cartoon that surrounded the adventures of Hulk Hogan with Roddy Piper as the main bad guy.
In
I
in
mean
that
that
in that series, like, were they still wrestlers, or were they like established as kind of superhero type characters?
no, they were just wrestlers, just going town by town doing stuff, but getting into trouble with each other.
Because I'm curious how, because wrestling has fiction elements. From what I'm aware of, wrestling has some fictional elements to begin with. I haven't, dove into things too much, but from what I gather from friends, there is a level of sensationalism or very mild fantasy, and I'm curious how much they're going to lean into that, with the realm of animation.
Probably not into a Saturday morning cartoon like thing, like said Hulk Hogan cartoon. But never say never. You're right. And yeah, that's sort of how pro wrestling works. Maybe it's those sensationalism elements that certainly gives it its appeal, but ends up hooking in people who are into anime too.
And they definitely have the crossover because we've even seen it in the stands with people holding up their signs that are either anime inspired or video game inspired
Oh, remember?
and asking for Mother 3.
Oh yeah, that too.
And that was funny too because that came up again this week in a
Oh
tweet from
yeah.
Terry Crews. Oh man, that was a good one.
And a couple weeks ago with Reggie, saying that he had his secret Mother 3 copy that he wished was released.
Mhm.
Oh man.
Well, it's out of left field in one way, but there's you can make connections.
I think
So it's not as far fetched.
I think there's possibility there. I mean, another thing that was announced, I think maybe a couple months ago, was that they're actually making a Kamen Rider anime series. And the only reason why that connects to me is that I know that Kamen Rider and things like Super Sentai are live action fictionalized superhero shows essentially, but I always connect those series with those stage shows and those rooftop performances you sometimes see parodied in anime, that are usually on the roofs of malls and things. So I see that there's some level of connection with that live action performer element, and the fact that they're making an anime series based off of a live action production, I am kind of leaning into thinking that whatever comes from WWE's animation, I think it might be a little bit more fantasized, or fantasy adjacent or fantastical than just here's some wrestling people, but they're animated now.
I could see that certainly myself. And remember that we've even seen WCW briefly go into comic books for a bit too, but it was all based on their present wrestling plots at the time. I who knows? Who knows? I think I lean more towards taking WWE personalities and putting them in movies. So basically, what you see with WWE movies itself, right? And see that there's a branch out that way. We'll see, but it's just interesting that we go into this realm now. just something worth talking about. Although, nice little segue there, Geoff. Live actions. Let's talk about that for a couple seconds. Studio Ghibli revealed, or Studio Ghibli's Toshio Suzuki revealed that there have been various producers who have asked permission to make a live action version of Nausicaa. So, and maybe the most noteworthy name in some of those would-be producers, Hideki Anno. Something like this, the first thing that comes to mind is Miyazaki would have to sign off on this, wouldn't he?
Correct. They said that Miyazaki was open to the possibility of Nausicaa having a sequel, but he was talking about hypothetical project, that one, the sequel being animated, being put in the hands of Hideki Anno. So you never know. Maybe he might think about letting him do a live action. And the other thing that would maybe make him think about is Hideki Anno has done some really great work on live action adaptations of older properties, his own, sorry, not his own, but of Godzilla, of Ultraman, and of Kamen Rider. I was going to say Evangelion, but then I'm like, oh yeah, that was a garbage fire, and he had nothing to do with that. That was ADV. Oh boy.
We've made jokes about what's become known of Miyazaki's prickly, grumpy personality. So most producers probably would not be able to get that permission, but like we were saying here, Ano might be one of the few who could come close, if not accomplish it.
I think there was an interesting thing in the article too. I forgot about it, but in 2012, Anno created a live action. It's Tokusatsu special effects for a short for Ghibli titled "The Giant God Warrior Appears in Tokyo," and basically it said that was inspired by Nausicaa. So that would be another thing in his court, so to speak. But you never know. It's up to Miyazaki, really, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I know that.
Although you know that there's a lot of the fandom who is begging for this not to see the light of day. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, I know that this is likely to be a Japanese production, but I would love to see Patrick Stewart reprise his role as the old man, Yupa was it, for the live action series. He would, just put a beard on him, and I think he'd be perfectly cast.
Wouldn't that be interesting?
Oh man, that'd be something.
Well, we've had this. Well, in the line of what we just talked about earlier. Never say never.
Given the unfortunate track record of Japan's CGI productions, I wish that if this gets made, it uses practical effects, for the insects and things like that.
So in that sense,
Oh
Ano
boy.
might be perfect.
Yeah, like I think Nausicaa is a beautiful story. I haven't read the manga, but I've listened to talks at Anime North and online just about how, amazing the manga is as well. But I think it's a beautiful story, beautiful world building. I don't want it sullied by what normally comes from Japanese CGI production. I know a lot of work goes into it, and it's not complete garbage, but they have not a great track record.
Kevin.
My thoughts exactly, Jeff. There needs to be a substantial budget for this to look good and for this to be a good production. And Japanese movies don't always have that. They seldom do, I feel. So I'm a little hesitant. It's not like I wouldn't want it to exist. Go for it. But I'm just a little worried.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they need the Netflix money. Who knows?
Well, we're assuming that this is going to happen.
Yeah, no,
Ever?
obviously, it probably won't happen, but you never know. They need something extra to make it happen, stuff like that. But
Yeah,
I don't,
like
Miyazaki being the man he is, would allow anyone to do it. But if he
yeah.
did, he probably would let Ono because he has such high praise for Ono.
Well, I was about to say you have to trick Miyazaki, but
Or you just wait until
no, don't say it. Don't say it.
Yeah,
Miyazaki passes on,
Ah,
I was
and
literally
then
gonna bring that
Taika
up.
Waititi will
somebody.
feel so bad letting Ono, well, assuming
Oh,
Tanisha's alive too, that then it can happen.
oh, you had to say that.
And to plug, just because we are talking about Nausicaa and because Geoff hasn't read the manga, you should definitely pick up the Viz hardcover set. They still have it, and if they do a sale, it's worth every penny. It is beautiful and colored and everything you could imagine.
And I imagine the public library has it too, if you want to just get a taste of it. I'd like to think so.
Okay.
And it's interesting because remember, Miyazaki, it took him many years to actually create that. And it was between his many different animation projects and stuff like that from way back when.
It's a wonder he's no longer a happy guy. Okay. Oh, there's not much else to add to this one, is there? I mean, we're gonna. I know we're gonna come back to talking Ghibli before this episode ends, and Miyazaki before this episode ends. So maybe we'll just double back for a couple seconds. One more bullet, I guess. On April 20th, World Events Productions founder and the producer of Voltron, Ted Koppler, passed away. He was 77 years old. He was also considered a TV pioneer because he was a former general manager of a local St. Louis television station, KPLR, and I think that was pretty much the flagship station for Voltron and World Events. So, yeah, it's sad news, obviously, to hear anybody dying. But obviously, things come to mind when you hear that this guy was one of the key figures in localizing Voltron into North America. And it had me thinking a little bit. Voltron came out in the early 80s or early to mid 80s. I think 84, 85 was it? I think that's what it said. Yeah, 84, 85. That's when Voltron first came out. And it came out around the same time as Robotech. And much like Robotech being stitching together three separate series in Macross, Southern Cross, and Mospeada, Voltron was stitching together two series as well, Go Lion and Armored Fleet Die Ruger 15. And this is my thought to you guys, and we already said that you probably wouldn't be able to answer it, but I want to put it out there anyway and have you guys make an answer and then put it out for the listeners. Over the decades, Carl Masek, the guy behind Robotech, was dragged through the coals by fandom for what he did to the three original series that make up Robotech. But that venom didn't come to people like Ted Koppler or Peter O'Keefe, who was the other creative force behind what became Voltron. That didn't happen on the Voltron side, as far as I could tell. At least any venom seemingly hasn't really endured over the decades. And I'm to this day wondering why. But I think this is the midlife crisis me speaking, because that might be well before your time. All four of you.
The only thing
But
I can think of is that people care about Macross and they don't care about Go Lion. I think if Robotech was just the other two series, I I think that the situation would probably be more balanced. But that's just, I own all the original Voltron, but I've never opened it just because it was like $3 at the CNE one year or something.
Good deal, dude. Good
Is
deal.
that the Media Blasters one? Because I know Media Blasters did well with Voltron, and they also released Go Line as well. So
Like they were, the head of the lion in these tin cases, and I was just at the CNE, and it's like,
yeah,
oh, three
that's the
dollars,
Media Blasters one. They were in tin cans. Yep.
$3 a season. I'll buy all of them. And I watched the first episode, and I was like, this is bad.
You could have been watching worse '80s cartoons there,
No,
Geoff. Don't worry.
yeah, I'm sure. Like I know I didn't give it a fair shot, but like I was really, yeah, it surprised me. But yeah, I think, people still talk about Macross. They don't talk about any of the other shows. Voltron
Yeah,
had the Netflix anime, and it had the other revival, I think, in the late '90s or early 2000s.
there's been at least 3 revivals that I could think of.
Yeah, but
One was a continuation, the other was sort of, or 2 of them were continuations, and then the actual Netflix one was like a reboot, as
yeah,
far as
and
I remember.
we'll see what happens with Robotech in the future, to see if that can kind of be revived. But yeah, I mean, this is coming from a person in early mid 30s, so I wasn't really around for either of these shows.
Anyone else have a thought? Or you think, or much the same? You're too young to really speak on it.
I mean, I feel like Voltron has more of a mainstream appeal because of all the reboots and remakes and so forth. And I mean, we'll see if that live action crossover happens, then maybe that'll catch on and people will be like, oh yeah, we
Well,
like
you just hit an interesting point. I think all the reboots over the last 20 years, I guess, especially starting with Voltron: The Third Dimension, that CG thing they tried.
Yep. I mean,
It, it,
it's kind of the same thing with, I guess, Saint Seiya, right? I mean, that's had a whole bunch of reboots and so forth, and that's continued its legacy onwards and onwards.
and I think it just sort of managed to bury the original series in its own way. Kevin, you have a thought?
Not really, because I was too young for Voltron.
Okay.
It never. I don't think it was even in syndication by the time I was old enough to watch TV, and never watched Go Line or Die Wrecker, so no comment.
James.
No comment as well. I wouldn't really have the foggiest to tell you the truth, right? But
Mm-hmm.
fandom can be weird sometimes too, right? And the other thing though is, remember, Carl Masick continued on with Streamline Pictures and many other things, so that could play a part as well because he was still in the public eye for a longer term, maybe. I
And
don't know.
basically being in the public eye by continuing to do what he did with Streamline. Maybe the bullseye just never left. It never faded because he was still involved and still out there for fans. I never knew about the name Ted Koppler until this week. So I guess that's a fair point.
I know that
Glad you bring it up.
I know that they're not stitched together series, but I find it interesting that if you look at Battle of the Planets, or Gatchaman, and Space Battleship Yamato, and what was it, Star Blazers is the
Yeah.
English
Mm-hmm.
title. I
Same
think
thing.
I think with those series, both the adaptation and the original are both kind of liked, and for a fictional series with communities, relatively respected. Like, I think that people understand, oh, okay, you like that version, cool. Oh, you like that version, cool. And I think that's just fascinating.
Hmm.
It's like the Thundercat stuff, right? I mean, there's many iterations and adaptations. Same thing with GI Joe. I mean, it's you like what you like, right?
Well, I will place one theory now that you sort of mention it. Go Lion, Star Blazers, or Yamato, and Gotcha Man Battle of the Planets. How close were they to their original plots? Well, in many respects, the Macross side of Robotech was too. But I think that's part of the story in the Venom, right? because they tried to. I think Robotech was stitching. As I said, we can go on that
And they were
for hours.
creating their own plot lines and stuff like
That's
that, and their own
probably
characters, which is a big thing. And even Gigantor and all those other earlier series, there were changes, but it wasn't to that extreme, I don't think.
maybe that's where it is. But always good to get a second. Sixth, seventh opinion, I suppose, and maybe somebody who's a little older and can understand that and explain it a little better, at least to me.
With Robotech stitching, were they like simultaneous stitching? Like maybe that's part of the issue.
Simultaneous in what way?
Like were all three series like stitched together out of order? Because if you look at Voltron, like there's still multiple series, but we'll go through one and then start the other. Did Robotech try to combine them like all at once, or was it the same kind of situation where you went from one to the other?
You
Basically,
went
it's
from the other,
one to the other.
Okay,
One to the
it is.
other.
and Macross was the first one and the most
And then,
memorable for
yeah.
most people.
And then they just basically found a way to transition from the end of one and the beginning of the next.
Okay, so
I
it
feel
is.
like it was kind
It
of
is
like the next generation or the new generation that it moves on to that next series, even though the character designs and everything look different to say the least.
okay. So it is a
But
similar situation then.
yeah, I suppose.
Huh.
But there's a thought right there. As I said, it's one of those things. Maybe I would ask for more standard historical perspective on, and maybe not something that none of us could truly give a good answer to. We can give our answers, and maybe some will agree or disagree. But I think somebody with a more historical perspective on those things can give a more solid answer. But I like thinking anyway. Nothing wrong with thinking, right?
Nope.
Well, we got through those bullets in about 45 minutes. I think that's a good record there. Less than 45 minutes. Not bad. Well, that's pretty much the headlines that caught our attention for the last couple weeks. Well, at least the ones we're willing to talk about. Before we go this evening, let's take a romp through the anime community calendar. And I'll start it off by making a quick recommendation. We have constantly talked about the Japan Foundation's New York's ongoing series about giving academic perspectives to Japanese pop culture. I believe they are now up to 7 little seminars or lectures or episodes or whatever you want to call them. The 7th one happened this past Thursday, and it's actually the first of a two-parter that focuses on Studio Ghibli. The first part focused specifically more on Miyazaki himself, and even more specifically, or more telling, the seminar or the presentation was referred to or titled Hayao Miyazaki, Children Entrusted with Hope. I think everyone knows how much kids play a role in all of his movies. They're the central characters more often than not. So, in this discussion, Susan Napier, who we've talked about, but now we get to really see her academic chops if you haven't already, and Helen McCarthy, who's a regular guest at Anime North, and both are very well versed, obviously. You don't have to take my word for it, plenty out there. They talk a lot about the type of roles children have in his movies. And we don't have much time left tonight, so I'm not going to go too far into it because it was like a 2-hour long presentation. But suffice to say, one key thing in all of this is you kind of have to look at Miyazaki's own life experiences to get a lot of the answers, but they'll get more specific. Also, you have to kind of go in terms of Miyazaki's own recent life experiences to probably also funny enough explain why he has such a grumpy personality now. Because they kind of address that in the latter stages of the presentation. It's a little over 2 hours long. We'll put the links up for sure in the show notes here. And of course, I've sent the link to the others and invited them to watch it. It's on YouTube now. Did any of you get around to watching that? Anybody? Or do you have an impression or a thought about it in any form? Okay. Really? I mean, we constantly joke about Miyazaki's grumpy personality. So, in many respects, Napier and McCarthy will, before the end of it, have you understand why he might be that way now. But it had me also thinking about a bunch of other things, and if you watch it, place that thought, give that thought, pair all the thoughts that you will see in this presentation, and then juxtapose this with something like Demon Slayer. And I know because much has been made about Demon Slayer being the highest grossing animated film in Japanese history, or film altogether, but certainly animated. And in some ways they were different, but in some ways they were similar too. But think about that if you ever decide to watch the presentation. There's my personal recommendation right there. Also, still to come in May, since we're starting May, TCAF. James, Kevin, I know you will want to say something about that before TCAF happens.
Yeah, it's a longer edition this time since it's going to be virtual. It's May 8th to May 15th, so starting next Saturday and then going to the following Saturday. And I know Kevin mentioned there's another manga guest, this time from Kodansha Akane Shimizu, because Cells at Work is finishing it up, and that's going to be an online presentation as well. So that'll be a nice one to watch as well.
I mean, an online art exhibit with her work, from the sounds of it.
That'll be interesting to see how some of those will play out. That one probably, I guess, will be a video they might either have on their YouTube or something like that. But some of the presentations I know we'll find out when they are during the schedule. But it sounds like they're going through the weekdays too. So hopefully they archive them for those of us who work during the week.
Yeah, I might
And
just have it in
then
the background, if anything.
Well, some of them I guess we could have in the background, but it depends on how they do the presentations because sometimes you want that visual element, right? If they show
Yeah,
some of the stuff, which is incredible, and sometimes they might do a drawing too, right? Like they might
point
do,
taken.
they've done that before where they're drawing while they're interviewing and stuff like that. They
Mm-hmm.
It
do.
seems
They
detailed.
don't have the schedule. I'm sure that'll be later in the week, hopefully. But they do have the exhibitor list for 2021. It'll be interesting to see how people will be visible and sell their wares. A lot of familiar names, but another familiar name that I just mentioned to Mike and the rest of you guys about Angela being on the list. So I hope she does well.
Yeah, so she'll be there for sure to promote Moonstone Diadem at TCAF. And I'm sure when we return, we'll have more of a report from James and Kevin and everybody else. By my own admission, TCAF is not something that's been on my radar. I fully admit that over the years. But I know for James and Kevin it is. And Mo, Geoff, you two, is it something on your radars?
I try to attend it every year. It's very inspirational as someone who does tool around with illustration and comic art as a hobby. So I think it's a great place for both larger forces in the industry and smaller independent people to just hobbyists people. I don't speak French, but it's kind of neat to see the French language contingent there every year. it's a remarkable physical experience when it is at the reference library. It's, like, as I've mentioned at the beginning, very inspirational, a lot of creative energy there. Very, good natured throughout. Lots of great panels and talks that go on there. I forget the name of the manga, but it was it's kind of a manga about an artist, something Picasso. It was a Japanese manga, and I
It's
saw the
Genkaku Picasso.
yeah, I met the author there. He was, limited English, but very polite and great work or great experience there meeting him. So I've had lots of great experiences in the past. I'm not super hyped about an online version of it, unfortunately. I think I'm gonna try to convince myself and sort of force myself to, because I want to support especially a lot of these medium and smaller artists, but a lot of the enjoyment for me was sort of the experience of physically going to that space.
Yeah, the
I think
reference library is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, and it's beyond there, of course, too. It's like they do have the hotels, but you then do have, remember, I forget the mall's name. I should remember it, just behind Bloor and that, where they made the zine section and stuff like that the past few years. And it's interesting just seeing the different zines because it's just all over the place and different creative ideas flowing and stuff like that. And some of it's in the written word, some of it's in the artistic expression, and it's just incredible to see. And even on the video game side at the top, and they've had it in various places, it's not video games or even top indie games as we think of them. Some of them they're still working on, and they're very experimental, and it's just fun just to play something and to sometimes you want to try and break it, sometimes you want to explore and see what's going on, but it's not something you normally see on the regular platform. Sometimes it might be coming to a platform and stuff like that if it's further along, but sometimes it's a school project or just an idea, and these different people bring ideas you're just not expecting, and that's the fun in it.
Yeah,
In all these different art forms, whether it's comics, the visual prose, or the video games.
I think it's safe to say, just the way you guys all describe it, that this is something that you cannot appreciate virtually. And that'll only go so far. It may not get anywhere at all. This is one of those things you really have to see in person.
It kind of is this huge cultural event. Like, I was lucky enough a couple years ago to see Junji Ito speak.
Everyone
Just
talks about Junji Ito's appearance there.
Yeah, like, it was kind of a pre-launch party thing. And even though it wasn't just for him, there were some other Japanese guests there as well. But from the international perspective, from the very local perspective, it helps the their kind of little shop there, Page and Panel, which I'm a big fan of, like, as a retailer. They're one of the best kind of smaller comic stores, and you know, sort of sequential art media kind of places, at least in the downtown area. So yeah, I'm gonna try to do, as I mentioned, I'm gonna try to do my best. But as you said, it's this kind of really cultural, creative event. As James mentioned, all those indie games, which in the last couple years has really, blossomed. So we'll see what happens.
We'll put up a link, at least to the TCAF website,
I
as
guess
we
the other
always do.
thing you can think of is, yeah, it was small, and yes, it grew out of the Ed Mervish's parking lot there behind the beguiling and stuff like that. And it was annual and stuff like that. And then once they got more sponsors, they went to the reference library because Toronto Library got behind it. Some of the consulates, the French and the Japanese and all these others got behind it. And the crazy thing is, it's still free. That's the crazy part
Yeah.
is it's
Yeah.
free. I can go to any part of it. I can see any guest. I can see all these various artists and these people expressing themselves, and I'm not paying a single cent to enter. But if I see something I like, if I see a career and say, I really like this, I can put my money down and help support them. And I'm actually supporting that person right there and there.
That's
Yeah.
so great.
Yeah. Anyway, but that is TCAF. That'll begin next week and go into the middle of May. And then we have something to look forward to at the end of May when we hold our first live edition of the Anime Roundtable as the finale of day 2 of Anime North's Stay at Home edition, the second online version to happen. As we mentioned at the top of the show, the call for submissions for the various panels and workshops, what have you, closed today. So we'll probably learn a few more details of what's to come for the online version. And for us here, we'll learn a few more details about what to expect when we do our first live episode or Saturday night, May 29th at 11 p.m. We'll tell you more as that date approaches. More like we'll tell you more as we learn more too. But in any event, that's all we got for this evening. Once again, if this is the first time listening, don't forget you can contact us. AnimeRoundtable@gmail.com is our email address. Once again, Twitter and Instagram @AnimeRoundtable, AnimeRoundtable.com for our show notes and past episodes. And don't forget to give us a review wherever you get your podcasts or wherever you're getting this, because good reviews will help us in the algorithm and hopefully will be able to be seen by others who might be really interested in this show.
Please leave us a 5-star review on Stitcher or Apple Podcasts because you cannot leave ratings on Spotify.
We do episodes typically once every other week, but every so often we will do episodes on our off weeks as well. Regardless, wherever you're getting this, don't forget to subscribe so you can be notified whenever we come out with something new for you guys to listen to. But until next time, thanks for listening. Good night from Toronto. Join us again for another edition of the Anime Roundtable. Well, congratulations. Somehow this episode did get a little over 2 hours, I think.
I don't know. With editing, it might be a clean 2 hours. Although the little discussion now, if you keep it in, will probably push it over.